My name is Liz Horrobin. I'm from the British Dyslexia Association, and I'm going to be coordinating today's session. Thank you very much for attending the session. It's been developed by the British Dyslexia Association in association with PATOS. Thank you too to the Department for Education who funded the project and enabled us to develop and deliver this training as a free resource. Now, because it's free, we've got one request for you, and that is that we have an evaluation questionnaire which will be sent out to you after the training. It enables us to report back to the Department for Education and also to improve the quality of our training in the future. So can we please ask you as a big favour to complete the evaluation questionnaire. Remember too that all the materials today are available for free download and will continue to be available for free download from the BDA website, and recordings of the webinars will be made available on the BDA YouTube channel. We're going to have a short question and answer session at the end today, but do feel that you can type in questions as we go along, and I'll pick those up and I'll try to raise as many as we possibly can at the end of the session. If we don't have time to answer everything, then do please send questions afterwards. The best address to send them to is projecta@bdadyslexia.org.uk. Project A will be sending you out an email at the end of the session so that you know where to address your questions to. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to Jenny Price, who's our presenter for today. Jenny is a qualified specialist teacher who works in Suffolk and Norfolk schools. We're really thrilled to have her with us today. She's got an immense amount of experience of working not just with looked after children, but with children and young people generally who have a range of neurodiverse presentations. One particular area of interest that she has been in developing a personalised response to the education of looked after children and young people. She's also developed the Child and Educational Psychology Practice, which is a specialist team who work closely with a range of other social care, health and educational professionals for assessment, intervention planning and delivery, training and detailed diagnostic work. So we're in very safe and knowledgeable hands this afternoon. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenny. Jenny.
Thank you very much, Liz. And a huge thank you to your endeavours in making this all come together. So I'm really looking forward to this session. This is the first of 2 webinars designed for professionals. They will be of particular interest to social workers, virtual school leaders, their teams and designated teachers in school and college settings who work with children and young people in care. Our aim in developing this training is to increase awareness of neurodiversity so that specific learning differences such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, developmental language disorder, and so on, can be identified and effective support strategies put in place at the earliest possible stage. These support strategies will be linked to case cameos. These will focus on children and young people across the age ranges, from primary to post-16. And the case cameos will form the basis of the second webinar. Thank you, Liz. Defining the challenge. This highlights why we think the training will be of benefit to you. It looks at some current statistics connected with looked after children and their educational outcomes. In what is neurodiversity, we consider current definitions and explain why we've made neurodiversity a focus for these webinars. Finally, in holistic profiling, we'll talk about the importance of seeing the whole picture of the child or young person and identifying their strengths as well as their challenges. We'll also introduce you to a specific tool that will help you. So let's define the challenge. So moving on, we have 5 golden threads. Now, research shows that these 5 threads are critical factors. Early intervention is defined as an intervention which is timely. It can occur at any point in a child's life. The threads promote a coherent strategy for systematic change under the theme shown on the slide. There is a very valuable additional resource that should be considered, and that is Pupil Premium Plus. This is the designated funding that comes via central government specifically for looked after children and is allocated to support their emotional, social and educational development. A key question is, what are the implications of these particular themes for those in care? And how effective are the decisions we make about how best to use the resources available? We know that virtual school heads have an overarching responsibility, and it is their vision and leadership that can make a difference. Foster carers have a vital role. They need to be proactive if there is a concern about the educational journey of a child in their care. If social workers and designated teachers are accessing additional funding for children's education, they should consider seeking advice on how best to support learning, most especially if young people have any specific difficulties. Keeping these threads in mind and utilising Pupil Premium Plus is therefore very important. Moving on. So how well do looked after children do at school? We want to introduce a key element of challenge, and that is the statistics around educational outcomes for looked after children compared with their non-looked after peers. On the following slides, percentages are represented by a row of 10 figures. And you will see that a key feature of this series of slides is the worsening picture as we move from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 4. So let's look at Key Stage 1. At the beginning of their educational journey, there is a difference of approximately 25 percentage points between looked after children and non-looked after children. By Key Stage 2, this picture has deteriorated. The difference here is now 28 percentage points. By Key Stage 4, the picture is worse still. Only 14% of looked after children achieved 5 or more GCSE grades at A* to C. This compares with 53% of non-looked after children. So we're seeing a widening gap. And the next slide. Progress at Key Stage 4 also drops, with non-looked after children doing twice as well on average as a looked after child. Generally, it can be seen that the outcomes for looked after children worsens as they progress through school. It is worth noting that by the time these young people leave school, the situation worsens again. In 2017, 40% of care leavers between the ages of 19 and 21 were not in education, training or employment. This compares with 13% of all other 19 to 21-year-olds. moving on. So there we have it. The NEETs are not doing particularly well, are they? So moving on again, Liz. At the same time, the percentage of looked after children identified as having special educational needs and difficulties stands at 57, compared with 14% in the non-looked after population. Of the children in care identified with SEN, 27% have an education, health and care plan, an EHCP. This compares with a general figure of 3% of all other children. By far the largest proportion of looked after children with an EHC plan are identified as experiencing social, emotional, mental health issues. However, there is another consideration. For example, the impact of unidentified dyslexia can have a huge toll on an individual's self-esteem, as their literacy skills fall further and further behind. Ensuring children and young people can master literacy skills is essential. So whilst social, emotional and mental health issues are those most frequently identified, they may in some cases be exacerbated by an unidentified specific learning difficulty, such as dyslexia or attention deficit disorder. Five key issues. The Social Exclusion Unit have identified these 5 key issues as affecting outcomes for looked after children. Children in care may need extra support in education, either because they have missed out on schooling or because they have additional needs, or perhaps both. And if specific learning differences are not identified at an early stage in a child's education, this is likely to impact their behaviour, their mental health, and in turn, their educational outcomes. So let's return to the 5 golden threads. You may have noticed that there's an orange star in the top left-hand corner of some of the slides, and this indicates a particular suggested activity that you'll find in the supporting materials. Remember that the training and support materials will be available for you to use again in the future. So at this point, a discussion activity, or perhaps a personal reflection, would provide a good opportunity to process the information covered and to consider the role of the 5 golden threads and how they might have played a part in combating the issues outlined in the preceding slides. We now move on to the second part of the presentation. A discussion about neurodiversity. The term neurodiversity was first coined around 1998, and since that date it has come to mean different things to different groups of people. To some, neurodiversity still applies only to the autistic community, and even then specifically to high-functioning autism. To others, it refers to anyone who has a learning difference, such as dyspraxia, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on. However, we'd like to take a broader view of the term. And on our next slide, we have a quotation. This is how the American writer and academic Nick Walker defines neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the diversity of human brains and human minds. The enormous diversity among individual human minds is a product of multiple factors, including environment, culture, family, and personal history. But human minds also possess an innate diversity which interacts with these other factors to produce the unique individuality of each human being. Notice that Walker includes the influence of environmental and personal factors in the development of the human mind. He goes on to say, we are neurologically diverse species. The enormous innate variation among individual human bodies extends to our brains, which differ from one another like fingerprints. This diversity of brains means a diversity of cognitive styles, a diversity of innate cognitive strengths and weaknesses, gifts and peculiarities. This is what is meant by neurodiversity. And within this quotation, you will note that Walker is including everyone in the human species in his definition. This is an important point. He isn't just speaking about people who have learning differences. He sees everyone as being part of the spectrum and is calling out for us to respect all the differences which are innate within our species. And the next slide. Within the spectrum of neurodiversity are learners who may be identified as having specific learning difficulties. And here we have some of them. Dyscalculia, dyslexia, developmental language disorder, which was previously known as specific language impairment, or SLI, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder, autism spectrum disorder, and so on. You may also want to include conditions such as Tourette's syndrome in this diagram. But what's important to realise is that learning differences such as these do not occur in isolation. Back in 2001, the American academic Bonnie Kaplan stated that in developmental disorders, comorbidity is the rule, not the exception. When she said this, Kaplan was acknowledging that learning differences overlap, and they do so to the extent that each individual has a unique profile which may combine traits from a number of different conditions. The consequence of this view is that we can't regard people with dyslexia or dyspraxia or ADHD as being a homogeneous group, in the same way as we can't view people who don't have specific learning difficulties as being homogeneous. Rather, we have to see each person as unique, with their own distinct profile of strengths and challenges. At this point, it's really important to note that not all learning difficulties arise from specific learning difficulties, and it is not the intention of this training session to imply that this is the case. We're well aware that conditions such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, trauma, and attachment issues will play a crucial role in a child's development. And while it is beyond the scope of this training to cover these conditions, it is very important that you as professionals are both cognizant of them and alert to any telltale signs that they may be present in a child or young person's profile. But let's look next at holistic profiling. Now, this slide introduces the third and final part of this session and is one of our key messages of the training. The core aspect of the neurodiversity movement is looking beyond the label and understanding the strengths and talents that make up each individual profile. The iceberg is an image that may be familiar, but nevertheless is useful as a reminder of the importance when we're looking at the neurological profile of a child or young person to see what is beyond the surface appearance, not just for the reasons that may underline outward-facing behaviour, but also for the strengths and talents that may be hidden below the surface. So let's start with our strengths. Now, the list of strengths and challenges will be far from exhaustive. There will be other attributes that you would add to this list, and this makes for a very comprehensive and interesting discussion in teams as to the immense depth of strengths that we can notice. Now, children and young people who demonstrate behaviours associated with specific learning difficulties will very often have a significant number of strengths which may be masked by their apparent learning difficulties in areas such as reading and writing. They may include any of the talents listed here, plus many more that you will be able to think of. However, we recognise it isn't just strengths, but there are also challenges. So in the same way, this list of challenges that we've compiled can be added to. But what is important to remember, as we've already said, is that no two individuals who are dyslexic, or dyspraxic, or autistic will be alike. Everyone is different. Everyone has their own set of challenges, and we recognise that for a child or young person in care, there are additional barriers too. You may wish to think about other presentations of dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia, etc., and the impact that these might have on a child or young person. The accompanying guide to specific learning difficulties that is available to download alongside this webinar has further invaluable information, and we would really recommend that you check that out and look at the explanations around those particular areas of difficulty. They will help to reframe and build on your skills and knowledge. So moving to our next slide. One of the greatest challenges for the non-expert is to know the signs to look out for that may indicate a child or young person is at risk of dyslexia or another learning difference. One of the greatest risks is that because of a fear of wrongly labelling a child, that no action is taken, or perhaps we wait too long before we make these investigations. To help avoid this situation and to provide a framework through which to observe behaviours that are often associated with specific learning difficulties, we've developed the neurodiversity profiling tool. We'll be looking at how to use the profiler in more detail in the next session. But for now, we want to give you a very brief introduction so that you can take an opportunity to look at it in more detail before resuming the training next time. Now you'll notice that there are tabs at the bottom of the page. The introduction that we're looking at the moment, and for this exemplar we're looking at the secondary profile. However, please be aware there is one for primary and early years and post 16. So according to the age of the child that you're working with, you select the right age of profiler. Each of the profilers has a comprehensive introduction for you to refer to, and it also has a particular part of the profiler which looks at strengths. So part B, if you go to the tabs at the bottom, you'll see part B. That's the support strategy. Part B, lovely. Okay, this is a really nice thing to do with a student to start the session off. You can consider the things that they are good at. And by asking the questions, you're tuning the child into thinking about themselves and things that they can do well. This can be done online, or you can print it off and do it as a paper exercise. However, the more in-depth profile, which we'll look at in sections part A, so the next tab along, okay, we have a series of questions here, and we've hidden some of the columns because these are not necessary when you're with the student. However, ease of sight on the page, and because it's better when you're actually interviewing and talking to the young person themselves, we would suggest that you condense parts B and C. So this for our questions. Notice in the first column that there are rough areas of interest. So the first one we're looking at the top here is the speech and language. But as we move down the profiler, you will see there are different areas that may be suggestive of different specific difficulties. This one we're looking at is literacy and numeracy. We've got praxis, which would be around dyspraxia. Moving further down, areas of behaviour, which are likely to show in all of the frustrations that the young person is experiencing. And moving further down, we've got cognition. And then a section at the bottom of the page for any additional notes and comments. So the process is quite simple. We select a series of questions that we feel are pertinent to the young person. May not be all of these. And we simply ask them the question, do you, etc. Now you'll notice the right-hand column has a select, and we're going to ask the students whether this applies not at all, sometimes, or often. So for example, do you have difficulty making out the sounds of words? In this case, the student replied, sometimes. So you would enter sometimes. The next question, do you find it difficult to understand wordplay jokes, or perhaps jokes with double meanings? You might need to give an exemplar of that, but the student will give you an answer, possibly often. Do you need to have information repeated before you get it? Often. Do you find longer, more complicated vocabulary difficult to learn? sometimes. And you continue along this vein. Now, moving back up, you'll notice there's another tab at the top of the page, just there above this column. And if you click on there, this is what you'll see. And you can sort this into the areas that you want to investigate. So we're interested on this occasion in the often and the sometimes. And this will give us a distillation of the areas of particular difficulty. And you can do this just for the most prevailing ones, the oftens. You can do it for both sometimes and often, or conversely, you could do it for not often, never, not at all. So the program that you build with the student is very personalised and pertains to their particular difficulties. So if we move back to all profiler, and you can bring back columns that we've lost there, Liz, that would be great. Okay, and for your information, those two columns give you the area of difficulty and the associated condition. So you're able to sort it and look across and see the conditions that we're interested in. Now, as a starting point, we've put together a support strategy, and we'll be talking about those in more detail next week. But for your information, that's the bottom tab there. And again, these are divided into areas of specific difficulties. And these are our top tips that have been devised, tried and tested, stood the test of time, and are really recommended by a number of key professionals in their field. Again, this is linked with the guide to specific difficulties, which is the other resource that's a must go to for you in the future. And we hope that you will find these very useful. And it's in the next seminar that we'll be looking in the webinar in detail at pupil profiling. But before you come back, we hope, and join us for our second session, the webinar, we'd urge you to have a look at the profiler in more detail so you can really tune in to what we're saying. And a hyperlink has been added so that you can go straight to the online profiler from the webinar. You may have a young person in mind that you would like already to have a trial with, or recommend it to somebody else. So there we have it. We've got the 4 tabs: the introduction, the supporting strategies, and the 2 profilers. Part A, the detailed, comprehensive questioning of the student, and Part B, which is focusing on particular strengths and is a really nice starting point. Much shorter than the previous one. And for the early years profiler, not only do they have it in accessible language, but there are lovely emojis for the child to relate to. So it's a really fun activity to share time if you're interviewing or working alongside a younger child. So there we have it. That's the profiler. And if we return to the webinar, you'll see the slides. We have one final slide. we have the profiler, and our final slide are our references, and these are the key references. There are considerably more in the training pack that accompanies the webinar, so you'll find chapter and verse in there, but these are ones that you will find also of interest. And you'll notice at the bottom there's a link to the BDA website, and this is where it will take you to all the documentation that you can download at your leisure and find out more about. So there we have it, the first webinar session completed, but we're very interested in any questions that you have, and I hope you've been sending those through, and I think Liz will be able to address those as and when.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that, for taking us through all of that presentation. I'm just going to clarify one point that Jenny made at the end. At the foot of the references page, there's a link to the Teaching for Neurodiversity resources and webinars, which we produced last year specifically for teachers. So those are not the same resources and webinars as we're using today. The page that you need to access for all of today's materials is the one that you've already been sent a link to by the project administrator. Now, if you haven't already received that link, if you don't have it, then we'll be sending it out to everybody who's attended today, again, just for your reference. Some people have been emailing or putting out questions just now about the profiler and where you can access it, also about the guide to specific learning differences. All of the profilers are currently available on the webpage, the BDA webpage. The guide to SpLD hasn't been uploaded to there yet, but we'll do that this afternoon, so you'll be able to access it from there. Do you have any other questions? I've got one from Glynis here saying, do schools and social workers have these profiles included in PEPs? Jenny.
Well, they certainly do if you raise awareness of them. And if that's part of your role and you can make that happen, I would really recommend it. I think it's an excellent way of having a purposeful review and adding value to the discussion with the young person. So yes, make it happen, because it's really excellent when it does.
Similarly, Denise is asking if she can use the profiler and its results as part of a PCP.
I see no reason why not at all. One would always want to get a very comprehensive background of any young person for whom there were additional concerns, and what better way than actually using this.
Okay. Jill has just asked if the training pack will be sent to us later. Jill, you should be able to access the training pack, all the notes and materials, as a handout on your screen at the moment. You should see below the questions box, there's another box that says handouts, and there's a number 2. If you click on the arrow there, that will open up that box and you'll see the slides for today and also the training notes and materials for today. But if you can't access them through that, then when we resend a link out to everybody, you'll be able to get them from the web page. Glynis is saying, I wonder why hide the columns from children and young people? Would it help to be transparent and explain what we're doing? They may want to discuss results and the intervention plan as a result. Well, that's a good point, Glynis. What would you say to that, Jenny?
Yes, I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. You know the young person best, and I think that's a professional call. You might want to look at it afterwards. You might want to just do the questions and then say, okay, what does that tell us about your profile? I think one of my caveats would be that actually to identify any of these specific difficulties, it takes more than a profiler. So it would be disingenuous to say to a young person, you are dyslexic on the basis of the profiler. It is only an indication of, and they need a thorough and deep assessment by a practitioner who has the skills and knowledge to do that. However, the first thing that the practitioner doing an assessment would be really interested in is the profile picture. So we would always welcome as much information as possible. So a young person holding that information and saying, it looks as though I may have this particular area of need, can you help me find out a little more about it, would be an excellent route to go down. So yes and no, but your call.
Yeah, I think very often, Glynis, it depends on how vulnerable you think that child or young person is and how affected they are likely to be by any indicators that come up. I think it's got to be a very sensitive call on your part there. But remember, please remember, the profiler is not a diagnostic tool. The reason for using the profiler is to put in place any further recommendations and to immediately put in place some kind of support strategies so that you're helping the issues that the child or young person is displaying as early as possible. Julie has asked if we've come across examples of the profile being used in the early years, and she's also asking, can parents or carers use this? I've had parents and carers ask me if they can use the profiler, Julie, and there is no reason why not. The profiler is available online. We're not blocking anybody from using it. I think the key thing is for people to understand its limitations. Again, I'm going to say very strongly, it's not a diagnostic tool. And very often parents want a diagnosis. They want to be able to put some kind of label there immediately. It won't do that, but it can raise the question of whether further assessment is required and whether it's necessary. Jenny, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, in fact, I was at a nursery and infant school only yesterday talking to key members of staff about developing their early identification practice. And I was recommending the profiler as that first step for children for whom they have concerns, rather than knee-jerking into getting an educational psychologist in, because budgets are stretched. And whilst some children need further down the line that type of intervention and that additional expertise, as Liz said, as a first port of call, actually making a difference and looking at strategies and things that we can do to make those reasonable adaptations in the classroom may actually be sufficient for some children who present with concerns. So I think it's always a balance between being insightful and careful in how you look at children and you don't wait too long, but using the profiler, making some good decisions about intervention within the graduated response, which is part of the code of practice for special educational needs. We need to do assessment, we need to plan, we need to do and review. And in my mind, the profiler is part of an initial assessment. And any information that you gather there may go on to further professionals such as psychologists or paediatricians, speech and language therapists. And they'll be very grateful that you've done that first tranche of work with the young person.
Thanks, Jenny. Brenda's saying there's a problem with the link to the BDA page. Brenda, apologies for that. We'll look into that immediately and get it sorted out. Sarah is asking if we can add the training materials to their virtual school website. Please do, Sarah. These are materials that have been developed under DFE funding, and we want to get them out there. We want them to be used as widely as possible. So wherever you are, please use the materials in any way that you see fit. Absolutely. Anne-Marie is asking if it's an international profiler or if it can be used in other European countries or if it's just British. I don't see any reason why you can't use it anywhere in the world, Anne-Marie. Jenny, would you like to add anything to that?
Children, people are children and young people wherever they are. I mean, there may be some cultural differences in the nuance of the questions that you might need to take into account, but yes, I mean, go for it. I think it'd be really interesting to get some feedback on that. Interesting point.
Yep, absolutely. You may find that if you are using the profiler in another country, you might need to tweak certain aspects of it. But this is another thing that we want to stress. If you want to slightly change any of the questions, it's not sacrosanct. You can change the wording of the questions. You can change some of the content if you like. If you find that it's appropriate to your setting and your situation, then please do. It's there to be used. Martin is asking if the support part is available as a separate handout. No, but you can print it out and make it available as a separate handout, Martin. Also, when we get to the parent and carers session, we've got a separate little booklet of support strategies specifically for parents that focus on the kind of things that you can do at home to help support young people and children in your care. So you might find that useful. Elaine is asking if there are any issues around the sharing of the profiler as in terms of copyright. Please, Elaine, just reference it to BDA and PATOS, and Department for Education. That's the only copyright issues there. Maritza is saying the problem with the dyslexia assessment is that it's very expensive for schools. We fully appreciate that, Maritza, and yet that is a big issue. What we want at the BDA and PATOS as well is to see the day where every school has a fully qualified level 7 and a professional working there who's able to undertake assessments for the school. That would be the ideal situation. Jenny, do you want to add anything there?
Yes, and I think certainly in my local authorities, looking at clusters, looking at multi-academy trusts, having those key professionals that can be used across schools is certainly the way to go. So training and embedding those skills and that knowledge actually in school is far better than buying in a professional who's not part of the school setting. So yes, increasing awareness, developing whole school practice around dyslexia is critical and does actually make a huge difference.
And remember also, Maritza, you don't need an assessment to put support in place. If you're identifying the needs of the child or young person and supporting those needs, then you're doing the very best thing, even without an assessment. Glynis is saying that she thinks it's a positive way to begin the conversation about learning requirements. Glynis works with children in care, but she feels very concerned that they have such low educational outcomes. So the earlier the profiles used may help the intervention when they need it. Absolutely, Glynis. And we're all for early intervention and early identification wherever possible. Glynis is also saying that social workers need to understand how to ask questions to assist and to be part of the professional planning. Yep, and people working together wherever possible, Glynis. It's when people work together and share their findings that we can really begin to make progress, rather. Charlotte is saying, can the profiler be used with non-looked after SEND children? Absolutely, Charlotte. We developed the profiler originally as part of our Teaching for Neurodiversity package for teachers last year. But the version that we've got this year, I think, is vastly improved on last year's version. We took lots of feedback from the teachers who used the profiler last year. They said that they wanted to see something about strengths, they wanted something about support strategies, they wanted something that focused less on the individual conditions and more on outward behaviours. So that's what we've tried to do in the profiler now. It can be used with absolutely anybody. Jill is asking, can you remind her of the dates of the parents webinar session? Yep, Jill, the parents webinar session is on the 28th of this month, and the second part of this training for professionals is on the 21st, in a fortnight's time. Julie's saying, can we host stuff on the Send portal, on the NASEN Send portal? We will be doing that, Julie, as soon as everything's available. Now, Joe is saying we have something in their school. I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Joe. You're studying for an MEd at the moment, assessing, advising staff. What type of role would you advise? Joe, maybe you could add something to that. Oh, to clarify, what job title, teaching load, etc. for the level 7 professional? Jenny, it was you who raised that thing about having level 7 professionals in schools. What job title, teaching load would you think would be recommended for that?
Oh, that's a contentious one, isn't it? That interesting question. I know assistant heads in large academy trusts who hold that professional qualification have a passion for supporting learners that have specific difficulties and really undertake in-depth assessment of their learners. And I have to say that that's not factored in at all whatsoever into the day job. So how long is a piece of string? To do the job well, you need designated time and resources. But as we know, monies are tricky. However, you do have Pupil Premium Plus for your looked after population. So if those children are ones for whom you have concerns, then I think the question needs to be asked, would that be an effective way of using that additional money? And having a comprehensive assessment by a practitioner would certainly, I think, be money well spent. I'm not sure that really answers your question, does it?
Joe is saying again that they have a level 7 professional and level 5 dyslexia person to choose a level 7. I think you're fortunate actually to be in that position of having the two of you there, Joe. I mean, obviously we would recommend, and I think what the Department for Education would also be saying going forward is that where you have people with your level of expertise, that it is used sensibly with not just your school, but within your own cluster of schools as well. And obviously for more people to be able to see the benefits of having that level of training, hopefully more people will get funded to go on and do the training. There's a question I was going to come back to. Oh yeah, Claire says, is this training going to be offered to schools? Claire, we did the training last year for schools, and that's that link at the bottom of the references pages. All of the teaching for neurodiversity resources and webinars are available on the BDA website. I think also still on the PATOS websites too. So there is a separate training for schools, which is a bit longer. It goes into a bit more detail of classroom interventions as well. Elaine is saying PPG Plus was mentioned earlier as a means to support, but is only relevant for statutory age. Any suggestions for post-16 funding? It's a tricky one, Jenny.
The post-16 funding, yes, that's a question I think, Liz, that we need to take further advice on, because I'm not sure. Yes, you're right. The Pupil Premium Plus is for children at school.
Yeah.
However, if they have an EHCP, of course, then it's 0 to 25 years. So it's a sort of different
of course, very few people with dyslexia, for example, get an EHCP, so that's a problem too. Glynis is saying that perhaps school clusters could share funding to pay for an assessor. Yeah, that could happen, Glynis, where people actually pool their funding together for school sites, and the assessor can go to all 4 schools like a peripatetic worker. It's a good thought. Just clicking through questions, people saying very, very useful tool. Thank you guys. I do hope that you're going to find it useful to use. useful tool for schools to complete to determine the best use of Pupil Premium Plus. Charlotte asks, can I clarify how much PP funding we receive per child? Goodness me, I'm not sure. Through Suffolk, it was 566 per term, but I'm unsure how much Norfolk is. Any idea on that, since that's your area, Jenny?
I think it's the same, isn't it, in each local authority? Isn't it a designated amount?
This is the same amount for each, but I'm not sure. Sorry, guys, I'm not up on those figures at the moment. Rose is asking, how can the profiler be used in conjunction with the virtual school work? I think that's entirely up to you and your own setting, Rose, however you feel it to be most appropriate, and how you're working with your social work teams. Whether you feel that it's most appropriate for somebody in the virtual school team to be delivering the profiler, or somebody within the social work team to be delivering it, whether you share the responsibility. I think certainly the really important thing is that when you are using the profiler, engage the child or young person themselves, engage their foster carers and parents, so that it's very much something that you're doing together. Now, we're going to go into much more. Oops, Nigel is saying £1,900 for Pupil Premium Plus per annum. Okay, so that maybe answers that question. Okay, we're going to be closing up in just a couple of minutes, everyone. So I just want to remind you that the second part of this training is going to be in a fortnight's time. So I do hope you'll join us for that. I also hope that in the intervening period, you'll take a bit of time to access the profilers and to try running through a profiler, perhaps not actively with a child or young person at this stage, but with a particular child or young person in mind. Try also, I think it's really useful to go through the profiler with a colleague, and so that you make this a kind of discussion type activity. And then when we come back in a fortnight's time, we'll be able to take all of the kind of questions that have been raised by your experience of doing the profiler. We'll also be looking in detail, in depth, at how the profiler has been used in a number of case studies with different age ranges, so that you can see the practicalities of using it. Okay. That's us for today. Thank you so much for attending. I do hope you've enjoyed this